Thanks everybody for joining. This is Bill Van Orsdel from Book Fuel with this evening's Self-Publishing Wednesday webinar. The subject of our webinar tonight is prepping your book for TV or film opportunities. I am so pleased to have a guest with us tonight, Philippa Burgess. We'll introduce her in a moment. But before we get started, I want to let everybody know that we're capturing this as a recording for playback later. Sometime around midnight tonight, you all get a link back to this recording. So if you have to leave early or you want to pass it along to a friend or another author, you're welcome to do so. You're also welcome to send me a request for the slides. I'll be happy to share them with anyone. We've got a lot of text on the slides tonight, not so many pictures, but we've got some of the basics captured of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And let me just run through our basic assumptions. And assumption number one is that you have completed or you're working on a book. It can be fiction or nonfiction. You haven't sold or given away your TV, film, and video rights. And like most authors, you're interested in seeing your work up on the big screen or on the little screen. So pretty simple stuff tonight. I think it's kind of exciting. Just, of course, a quick word from our sponsor from Book Fuel. This is not a sales pitch, and this is not a how to do it. This is more like a what to do. We're really going to have an interview format tonight where I'm going to ask Philippa a lot of questions about her experience in Hollywood helping authors do this exactly, transform books into TV and movie projects. Of course, Book Fuel, our sponsor tonight, is this web-based wizard. It's essentially an assistant publisher. It helps you walk through all of the self-publishing steps to help you make sure that you produce a professional-looking book. And that's all I'm going to say about it tonight. It's still in beta. You can check it out at bookfuel.com. Helping writers become successful authors is our #1 priority. And so that's why I'd like to share my email address, my phone number. If you want to call me with questions, you're welcome to do so at any time, and I'll do my best to answer them or to get you a good answer. And of course, I want to introduce Philippa. Philippa, when we did our talk this morning, I don't think I did a great job of introducing you. I'd like for you to sort of give us a little sense of your background and your passion for this topic.
Oh, my background. I'm just going to speak to this. I was into meetings this afternoon, and my place of origin really came up. My parents are British, and so I'm definitely very first-generation American. And they came here in '72, and I was born in '74. And then in the early '90s, I found myself, in high school. My dad I grew up in New York, New Jersey, and I was fascinated by all things media. I love television. I love movies. I love books. I love magazines. And I love businesses, just seeing sort of them pop up and grow and become part of culture and public consciousness. And I love celebrity. I love it all. I was fascinated by it. And so very early on, I'm probably in my freshman year, I remember Rob Reiner was shooting a movie in my town, and I had to go kind of check out the set. And by the time my dad got remarried and moved into New York City, and so pretty much by the time I was 15, I started working as a production assistant on commercials, and I worked for ABC. I got my first TV credit at 15 for an ABC after-school special as a production assistant, and then I started working for commercials and post-production house. And pretty much by the time I was 16, everybody was like, "Okay, you run this town." Given what my interests and my passions were, they're like, "Maybe you want to go to LA." And so I was a heat-seeking missile, and I recommend that everybody here be as well. For anybody who had been in and around entertainment, who had gone to USC, who had lived in LA, and I decided, I'd read every book, and it said, go to USC. And I mean, obviously, I was still forming my life, and I had that opportunity. I went to USC, and it was interesting that I wasn't the filmmaker, and so I actually ended up double majoring in film and international relations, and that speaks to a lot of my passion, which is I'm very interested in the world, and given that my parents had traveled a lot and lived in a few different countries and worked overseas, I was also very interested in the economics and politics of things, and so a lot of what we'll talk about tonight is I'm pretty good at seeing sort of the big picture and kind of how things work and how you sort of find your way and why things are done the way they're done and things like that. So what I sort of might, again, fuse is interest in sort of the economics and politics of entertainment and media. And then, of course, I went out to USC, and though I had done commercials and television, everybody was looking at me, but you haven't worked on a feature film. So I said, okay. So that next summer, I was back in New York City, and I was, again, back to being a heat-seeking missile. found my way, and it was really at that time like, who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who can get me a job working for Ron Howard. And so I spent a summer, I got a job on a movie called The Paper, and I worked for Ron Howard that summer, and that was a really fantastic experience. And then left USC and started working it out, again, reading all the books. So the advice was go work at a Hollywood talent agency. So I spent 3 years working in the motion picture lit department at ICM, which is one of the major agencies. And then from there went into literary management, where we represented writers and directors, and worked with a lot of authors in bringing their books to film and television, and also ended up working with a lot of authors with marketing and building their platforms. And because I was so passionate and deeply involved in media, social media was just so natural to me and just kind of just an obvious thing, and ended up doing a lot of social media consulting and brand building for businesses, and yeah, just kind of that, and then, you know, eventually started working for technology companies and advertising, and then decided that the world was kind of going in a different direction, and I kind of up and moved my life to Colorado, and next thing I know, I was right back in film and television publishing, and I was like, oh, well, I guess you learn the lesson wherever you go. There you are.
Fantastic, and you
Yeah.
know, that's a great story, a great origin story, and you know, I really like the idea that you've spent a decade helping authors get their projects into production. I think that's cool stuff. Now, we're in an hour. We are not going to have time to discuss everything. Now, I understand you're writing a book and you've got a working title, Realize Your Big Screen Dreams. We're going to work through some of that material tonight, but you know, I'll say this, and you can add to it if you'd like, Philippa, that if you go to Philippa's website, philippaburgess.com, you can sign up. She's willing to read your material, to work with you, but I think you've got a limited capacity to do that because it's not your main deal, is it?
No, but I'm regularly, you know, a couple people have sort of said, how much does it cost for your time? And I'm more than like I said, I basically charge $150. I'll read anything, and it's a session, you know, in advance of our meeting, and it's a session to just, you know, look at what you've got, where it would fit, and you know what a strategy is for moving forward. So but the reality is I can do about one of those a week, given you know all the other things I have on my plate right now. Although I have had such a busy day, I've actually been in production meetings on a documentary that I'm working on today, and actually another TV show that I was just kind of recruited by someone else down the hall to be like, we want you to work on our show. But I haven't even set that up yet, but I do promise that it will be. But yeah, if you guys can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and all the rest of it, if you are interested in anything, you know, in getting my perspective, but also, you know, guide you to a ton of other resources that can also be helpful to you as well. And I just commend you for being here today and expressing your interest, and you know, again, being open to the possibility. I want to say a lot of people, there's a randomness that I think people associate with Hollywood, but at the same time, to me, there's a logical structure to it as well, and there is a path that, to me, you know, like I said, you start leaning in, and it starts revealing itself to you in terms of what you need to do next.
Yep. All right. So you know, on all of these presentations, I like to start with the key points, because I know most audiences, they'll sort of pay attention for the first 5 minutes, then they'll drift off. Then when you tell them it's almost over, they'll pay attention again. So I'm going to start with our conclusion, and then we'll drill into detail on these. The TV and film industry has changed a lot. I mean, we think here in the publishing industry that things have changed rapidly. There's been a lot of turmoil, a lot of changing of the flow of the money. Well, that's happened to an even greater degree and earlier in the film and TV industry, and we'll have Philippa give us a little bit of a background on that. You also need to understand that, you know, although we talk a lot about, especially in some of our other sessions, about knowing what your book's genre is, knowing what your Amazon browse paths are, understanding the genre tree in Amazon and how it's different for books and ebooks and how it's different from the BISAC codes. Hollywood throws another wrench in the plan. They categorize your work differently at sort of the initial layer, and then also at the genre level as well. So you need to know what those are so you can figure out where you might fit, where your work might fit. Then also we're going to touch on, you know, there are 3 key reasons why a producer or a studio is going to buy your work. And you got to understand what those are, and again, position yourself as a brand, position your work as a brand to tap into those. There also might be some content adjustments that you want to make to improve your fit for TV and film, and we'll talk about what those are. you know, when Philip and I first talked about this, I thought, oh yeah, sure, this is great. But frankly, unless you have an uncle that works in Hollywood and you get really lucky, this will never happen for me. And Philippa assures us that that's not really the case anymore. Yes, of course, it always helps, but there are some, as she said, some very logical, structural, strategic things that you can do to move your case forward, and it's much different than it used to be in the past. And then, as sort of the last key point is, if you don't own your film and TV and video rights, your subsidiary rights, then you've got nothing to sell. So don't give them away. Don't sell them. You know, whether you're traditionally published or self-published, be very careful. Most of the people who'd want to take those from you have no intention or capability of using them effectively. So you should always keep them for yourself. So let's jump into why does this matter? Why should we bother to spend 45, 55 minutes talking about this? Well, it's pretty simple. Movie and TV tie-ins can increase your book sales, and that's what we're big fans of here at Book Fuel, is how do I increase my book sales? And, of course, selling the film or the TV rights either as an option or selling them outright, we'll talk about the difference between those two, is another source of revenue. And who doesn't like revenue related to the stuff that you spend so much time working on, your books? And of course, who doesn't, you know, it's a little bit of a bucket list thing. Who doesn't want to see their work on the big screen or on the little screen? I'd love to see my story up there. So, you know, I think it's a lot of fun to talk about this and talk about strategies to make it happen. My best guess is that Philippa is going to tell us that this requires effort and research. Otherwise, you are just waiting for a lucky break that's probably never going to come your way. You have to be prepared when the break presents itself. So, Philippa, start us off with, if you would, what's going on in this industry, and why is it so dramatically different than it was during the 80s or the 90s, and how can we take advantage of it as authors, mostly as self-publishing authors?
Absolutely. Well, like I said, I've already dated myself, so I'm sort of pushing 40 now, so sort of having a 20-year view in terms of what we've seen. When I started, everything was in-person meetings and hardwired phones, and that was why you had to know somebody who knew somebody, because, you know, someone would have to pick up the phone and get you in a room, and that was kind of how business was done. And, you know, then you had, in the late 90s, the beginning of cell phones, and then you had the beginning of web pages and the beginning of email. And we also sort of just started seeing, you know, as these new media and communications came along, you know, viewing habits of how people engaged with movies and movie theaters, you know, also started changing, and you've gotten DVD, DVR kind of, I was going to say, well, first you had, you know, home video, and then you started getting cable, you know, premium cable channels, and you got extended cable channels, and then we've just seen in some ways sort of a huge contraction of the industry, sort of for like the studios used to make a lot more movies than they do, and now they really just focus on big blockbuster tentpole movies, and then you've kind of got like the indie breakout movies. There are much, much fewer in like mid-level movies, and of those mid-level movies, so many of them, more of them are based on books, and so that's a big challenge in the which is great. I mean, actually, a lot of times as I've heard pitches at pitch fests and new screenwriters coming to me with ideas, I look at them going, you'd do so much better if you wrote that as a book, and you'd have so much more credibility within the industry and a lot more opportunity. And as authors, you do not need to be screenwriters. I'm really talking about, you know, how do you sort of bring a property that you own and put it in the hands of other professionals to do what it is that they need to do. So but again, we've sort of seen this sort of proliferation of, like I say, cable starting, you know, 2007 is like when they very first started creating original content, and now you have new buyers on the block like Netflix and Amazon are also kind of in that both production and distribution. And so we've seen, like I said, a consolidation on the feature film side, but a huge expansion on the cable side. And what you've also seen is so many more educational resources and pay-to-play opportunities to get material through the system. And, you know, we've seen a lot of, and again, I think the key is, you know, having a good opportunity to find, you know, how do you curate and navigate your way, understanding kind of which are the resources that are best and at the right time. But there, you know, to me, it still has high value to engage professionals to guide you at, you know, at critical junctures and lead you and in those ways so that you can have those opportunities, whereas before you really did have to know someone who knew someone. And now, like I said, you can sort of show up and you know, buy someone's time and say, hey, how do I, you know, get from here to here? And whether that is someone like myself who does some contract work or coverage services, conferences, other script consultants, I mean, who can really, and then doing those right things. Like I said, you'll find producers and executives and representatives, in the mix. But before you spend a lot of time and money on any of those things, one of the things we want to run you through is your own self-evaluation of, is your material kind of something that would lend itself? Like, does it have really good visual elements? If we're talking film and long form, does it have a good story arc? Does the character change? So we wanted to look at sort of the things that, like, what makes a good film as opposed to what makes a good book. So films are very external, where a book could potentially be very internal. And so those are some, and then we're going to talk about genres and formats. And if you feel like, okay, I can see where my property would fit in the film and television landscape, understanding it is both a large landscape, but it's a very organized landscape. So there's very clear boxes, and you have to kind of look at, like, okay, does that make sense, and would that fit in that box? And if it doesn't, moving on and saying, okay, well, what do I write next? Could I get it to fit in a box? And that's actually one of the reasons I think reading screenwriting books is incredibly valuable as a novelist, not because I want you to write screenplays, but to understand what that underlying story structure is, of how to keep that pacing really tight so that somebody can actually read your book and be like, wow, this feels like a movie. And so sometimes, by engaging sort of some of that craft into your writing as an author can only improve your writing going forward.
That's great. So, well, let's talk about categories for a minute. I mentioned earlier that Hollywood views things a little differently. I've got from your notes there are 4 key categories, starting with real world fiction. Tell us how that works. What are some examples of real world fiction? So how would I know if my book fits in the real world fiction category versus the fantasy or animated?
Yeah, so real quick, so you're either writing something that's fiction or nonfiction, and if you're writing something that's fiction, you're either writing something that's based on rules of the real world. So real characters in the real world. It can be period, it can be present day, but it's just based, sometimes it can have one magical element, like a movie like Big, but for the most part, it's real people in a world that we're all sort of familiar with. Where fantasy animated, there's many sort of magical elements. It could be animated, it could be future, there's all of these rules of the world that are outside of our normal experience, and you have to sort of define those rules and live into that. But and the reason I make that distinction is because I don't want you to think about, like, oh, I wrote a book, or I'm writing a movie, or I'm writing an article, but really think of it in terms of putting it in this box and then understanding how many ways that it slices across different media. Like, it could be a book, it could be a T-shirt, it could be a short film, it could be a ride, a theme park ride at Universal, it could be, and you're going to find that, like, fantasy and animated fiction slices across a lot more media than your real world fiction. So in terms of bigger marketability, Iron Man 3 has, I think they were saying, has made more money than all documentaries put together this past year. And so, when you're in that sort of fantasy animated, those tend to be the bigger movies, whereas, the real world fiction, are a bit smaller in just how they're kind of perceived. And then when you get into narrative nonfiction, then you're in the sort of the world of the true story that is being brought to, into a narrative form. And then you've got your general and prescriptive nonfiction, which is more of your experts, your how-to, and that tends to be a lot more of, like, some of the daytime TV formats.
Well, I'd be curious from our audience just where their books fit in the categories. I'm going to launch a little poll. If you do me a favor and just click on the screen by the little radio button next to the category that matches your book, let's just get a sense of where everybody is out there. We've got some people that are familiar. They voted quickly. Some others might still be looking at the screen trying to figure out what to do. If you would, just take your mouse and give us a vote there and let us know what category your book would fall in, whether it's real-world fiction, narrative nonfiction, fantasy or animated, or prescriptive nonfiction. All right, I'll leave the poll open for 10 more seconds. For anyone who wants to vote. All right, I'm going to close it. Let's take a look and see what we've got. So a very interesting split. Let's share this. We've got about a third real-world fiction, and then 2/3 fantasy or animated fiction. So no nonfiction writers on the call tonight. Okay, that's good to know. Let's dig into feature film genres, right? So this is the dark versus the light. How does this apply, and what can I, if I can slot my story into my fiction story into one of these, and what sense do I make of this, Philippa?
So I have a quick question. Hold on a second. I have just changed lines. Is this okay? How's my audio?
Echo's gone. You're good.
Okay. All right. So we've got feature film genres. I mean, this is one of the, I was going to say that the formula for, well, especially for film, is give us the fresh and the familiar. And the familiar is they want a box. And so when you look at sort of pitching whatever you have, you want to look at sort of what is the film genre that you're pitching into. And there's basically 8 genres. On the dark side, action, thriller, horror, drama. Sorry, I'm reading off your slides. You just flip those around. On the light side, action comedy, romantic comedy, broad comedy, and dramedy. And so those are your genres. And so if you are looking at like, okay, does my book translate into film and television, you want to kind of figure out, which of these genres does it fit into. If you're talking, and again, I'm going to be this is long form, because a lot of times when, and even a lot of book agents that I used to talk to, actually this is actually how we got a few book properties to represent into episodic television for network, is because I realized that a lot of agents, book agents out of New York, would talk about film and television, only ever be talking about long form. And when I informed them, I'm like, oh, well, actually, we're really looking to package and put together some things for network television that's episodic. They're like, oh, yeah, we actually don't even think of that. We wouldn't even know how that's put together, and it's a very different process. So for now, we're going to kind of look at long form, and then of course we can drill down a little bit into if you have things that can sort of fit the TV episodic world. So for this, each of these, think about it as eliciting one singular emotion from the audience for the entirety of the film. So action is going to be adrenaline. Thriller, it's kind of that edge of your seat. It's got a little bit of the adrenaline, but it's also very intellectual, kind of like what's happening. There's a puzzle to figure out. Horror, fear. And then drama, a good drama should make you cry. Light action comedy, it's going to, again, it's got a little bit of adrenaline, the humor. Romantic comedy, it's going to pull at your heartstrings. It's going to have that boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy wins that girl back again. Broad comedy, it should be side-splitting laughter. And dramedy, has a little bit of that bittersweet, you're going to laugh, you're going to cry, it's going to, and the thing about it is that drama and dramedy are the least commercial, and the only way those typically sell is because it's either based on a best-selling book that the audience is already familiar with, and or there's an actor involved or actors that they really trust to go on those journeys with. So it's that's a big part of where you get into that. The need to package things is the drama, the dramedy. But really, if you have a commercial piece, it's going to be the 6 genres of action, thriller, horror, action comedy, romantic comedy, or broad comedy. So that's really first and foremost, if you can look at your book property and say, hey, does it fit into one of those 6, then you've really got something.
Yeah,
for the feature world.
It's hard for me to think of a book that's a romantic comedy or a broad comedy. Is that something that comes through when the screenwriter gets a hold of a dramedy, that they can ramp up the comedy element of it, or maybe I just don't read those kinds of books and there's plenty of them out there and I should get out of my cave sometime?
I want to say there are plenty of them out there. Trying to think about, I will say I've seen, especially for comedy, now we're actually can kind of come into the episodic world for a minute. I've actually seen a number of books very well translated into TV shows. But actually, I'm kind of, again, throwing this one way back, but one of the reasons I always say, like, write a book is you control the underlying rights. And a book doesn't have, it can have a lot of insight and information into characters and their world, or it can have very little. I remember back in the day seeing How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and it was literally a book with stick figures and no more than 5 words on a page. And it has been turned into a movie, a comedy. It has been turned into a TV show, And that is an example. And Legally Blonde was a book. I mean, and there's hundreds of others that are out there.
So maybe I should broaden my horizons.
Oh yeah, they're out there.
All right, great. Let's drill into television formats for a minute. Does my target format, or when I'm thinking about my book, and of course some of these are in the nonfiction world as well, but are there things I should think about when I'm targeting a particular format that's not the feature film format with my work?
Well, and let me actually just do a quick compare and contrast. And other things you want to be thinking about is that in the world of film or long form, the character changes. There's a huge arc, and there's a huge just growth of the character from beginning to end. They change, their world changes. They have to sort of step up and show the courage and overcome, a series of challenges, and to get to a satisfying end. And again, the whole point of a film is that character arc, that character change. In television, the characters never change. The circumstances day to day around them change, but the character interactions are always going to be the same. So, Big Bang Theory or 2.5 Men or just any of those sort of, especially the situational comedies, but even your procedural dramas and all the rest of it, you know exactly what you're going to expect episode to episode as far as who the characters are and typically how they're going to behave. The interest comes in sort of seeing what they're going to bring, in and around these different situations.
Mm-hmm. Now, Nathaniel's got a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's it. And then when we were talking before about where I was saying drama and dramedy are sort of the least commercial, and I want to say for feature film, but they tend to have usually find a home in long-form cable.
Okay. So Nathaniel's got a question for us. He says, you can see hybrids of these genres, right? And I think he's probably talking about feature film genres, and I'm trying to imagine what a mashup might look like here.
Well, there's hybrids because there's a lot of other words. Like I was going to say, you can oftentimes say a psychological thriller, or you can say sci-fi, and yet, and there's other sort of subgenres and other things. Some of this is my language, and this is how I break the world in, because what I realized, again, selling literary material, is that what a producer or studio executive is looking for is what is that underlying consistent emotion, what is that promise to the audience. Everything else is window dressing. And so you want to sort of figure out, like, again, what is that core emotional driver, and you can then, and one of the reasons, executives will pass on material is if they don't know what it is, and that's, the formula is to give us the fresh in the familiar. But you need to own what the familiar is, and owning the familiar. Otherwise, you get things like it's a feathered fish, or it falls between chairs, meaning they don't know where to put it. They're not going to know how to sell it.
Okay, got it. Okay, so push versus pull marketing. I've got my book done, and now this all sounds very interesting. I guess I believe you that it's possible to take proactive steps to move my work toward film and TV. And I guess there's two ways to go about it. Maybe I want to do both, but you call it push marketing versus pull marketing of your work. Break those down for us.
So push marketing is everything that you need to do to sort of show up in the entertainment industry and ask the right questions and just lean in and start to explore and show it, like take advantage of some of the pay-to-play opportunities, and you may want to again invest in sort of going to some of there's a handful of conferences depending on sort of which direction you're looking to go, and there's ways again that you're reaching out and putting yourself out there and asking those questions to say, how do I move this mission forward? Pull marketing is just positioning yourself so they find you. When I was doing a workshop, one of the pieces that I was always taught was sort of leveraging the power of Hollywood publishing and publicity. And one of the workshop participants had a really incredible true story, and she had worked on putting her book together, and was also sort of had a foundation around the work that she was doing. And we were, had quite a bit of conversation around PR and how to get it and how to use it. And I think just in some ways it sort of opened her mind to what was possible. And again, there was a little bit of serendipity involved where somebody came to her with an opportunity to be interviewed for a magazine. And I think, again, having that awareness that this would be a good thing, she said yes. and got an incredible story written about her in People magazine. And People's formula is they look for sort of the ordinary in the extraordinary, which was her story, or they look for the extraordinary, like the celebrity, in the ordinary, so the celebrity in the grocery store. That's the formula for People. And based on that, producers at Lifetime saw her story, and they ended up turning it into the movie, Bringing Ashley Home. And again, she wasn't the screenwriter on it, but it was based on her true life story, and she had the underlying rights of her book. And so that's a way that she was able to sort of wave the flag and let producers come to her.
Okay, so I think I understand. Push marketing is the get out of the house, visit some conferences, get a coverage service. You didn't mention that, but I'm going to guess we'll talk about that in a minute. Get a coverage service, maybe think about getting a script written on my own dime so that it's shoppable. But pull marketing is...
No, don't write a script. You don't need a script. You don't need a script. I do recommend a treatment, and that's actually one of the shortcuts we can talk about coverage. Helps you get there because you're actually hiring someone else to kind of write the synopsis and give you some legitimate feedback in terms of what its real potential is in the marketplace. But no, don't worry about writing a script. That's this is not, unless you want to be a screenwriter, and that's a whole different conversation. But no, I do recommend writing a treatment, which is a synopsis of the book, so you can show somebody, and you yourself know to articulate, I see the movie in my book. I see what it is. Like I said, I do some private consults on occasion, and one of the guys that I'm working with is writing a book that's a memoir, and I had him pull out a treatment and, really kind of, and actually there's a wonderful book that I highly recommend by Chris Soth, S-O-T-H, called $1 Million Screenwriting, and he sells it as an ebook, I believe. I don't know if it's, but it really takes what they teach at USC, the 8 sequencing, the 8 beats. And so you take that 3-act structure, and it's 2 beats in the beginning, 4 beats in the middle, 2 beats at the end, and describing kind of what needs to be in each of those beats to get you to a movie. But I'm like, okay, you use that to sort of create and structure a treatment that sort of shows a beginning, middle, and end, defines kind of, that this is within a particular genre, and shows people where the movie is. And so when I had him sort of do the first version of it, and I was telling him stuff, and I don't know that he was hearing everything I was saying. I know he was trying to, but it wasn't so there was a point where I was like, let's send this for coverage. And we sent in the treatment that we wrote, and then he wanted to send the supporting chapters of the book just so they could sort of see the whole thing if they needed a little background material. And they came back and they said, this feels like a memoir. But they said, but it's begging to feel like a thriller. We want this to be a thriller. We want to kind of feel like this guy is not kind of complaining about his circumstances, but all of the ways in which he has been threatened and all of the stuff that's happened is real. And so we need to sort of see the cat and mouse thing, so not just from your perspective, but like build in sort of, who's pulling the strings, and that we could see this. And so he ended up coming back and rewriting the treatment to the point that it now is a thriller. And he fictionalized some pieces because that in order to make it a movie, it needed to no longer be a memoir. It really he needed to amp it up. And what he came back with was actually really cool, and I'm really excited about it. And now, again, this is where there is a personal touch, and that's why I said you do need to lean in, and it's not just sort of like that you need to know someone who knows someone. You need to now be proactive about building relationships because you do want to get to a place where you have some go-to people that you can ask questions and have them lead you in specific directions. Mm-hmm. And in this case, there are screenwriters that I know that I actually think would kind of find the story pretty cool. So I know in like the next couple weeks, that's my job, is to reach out to them and say, I got a true life story I'd like you to take a look at, and then I can sort of send them. And I'm actually wanting to send them 3 pieces. I want to send them the fictional treatment, I want to send them the memoir treatment, and then I want to send them a few like ripped from the headline news stories about like why this story is kind of interesting and relevant, mm-hmm. and kind of where it comes from. And so that's, again, a little bit sort of where that treatment has value and where that coverage service has value.
All right. So we talked about push marketing. Pull marketing is, of course, it's this list of things we've got here. This looks a lot like the list of things that I'd probably try to just promote my book and generate momentum with my book.
Absolutely, because that's what you're doing. You're waving the flag for the book. I mean, not that this is not meant to sort of in any way put anybody behind, but just in terms of if you want to sort of look at it from the high end, I was on Wikipedia and I was looking up just top best-selling books and looking at things that if a book has sold over, I think it's like 30 million copies, there's about an 80% chance that it will be made into a movie. If it's sold 20 million copies, about 50% chance, and if it's sold 10 million copies, it was down to I think a 30% chance. And then if it was fiction, across the board, anything that sold over 10 million copies, fiction, pretty much had a 60% chance of getting produced. So you exponentially increase your chances of having them find you by finding success and finding your fans and finding your audiences. And the reason is, if those seem like really big numbers, let's do the math for a minute. So if you self-publish a book and you invest $10,000 in getting professional editing and getting your interior design and getting a good cover design and other support services and great people like WaveCloud, and you can have that opportunity to have a good book that is ready for market. And if you were to sell that book at $10 a copy, you need to sell 1,000 copies to break even. Or let's say you sell it and you get $5 a copy, you need to sell 2 copies to break even.
Mm-hmm.
And so now let's bring those numbers into film. So if you have it costs $50 million to produce, it also means it costs another $50 million to market and distribute, kind of what they call P&A, print and advertising. And so now you're already at $100 million. Now, again, if the studio were to take $10 off of every ticket, the reality is they take less, do the math. So you need 10 million people to go see that movie in order to break even. That's why they produce the books that have sold 10 million copies.
Mm-hmm. They've already got word of mouth. Okay, so I talked earlier about content adjustments, and by the way, you just nailed screenplay. It's don't go pay someone to write your screenplay, although you might want to think about a treatment. And you just threw out some pretty big numbers, $50 million for a movie. So if I look at my book, how will I know if my book requires a giant budget to bring it to market? I mean, to turn it into a film. And is that good or bad?
Yeah, okay, so, and this is where we just kind of say that the reality, like I said, I think a lot of people look at the film industry as being a really big industry and a little confusing, and like I don't even know where to begin or where to start. And I want to kind of demystify that and say it's actually a really small industry from the point of view of there are really only 7 studio buyers. Maybe there's that are, so you've got Warner Brothers, Paramount, Universal, Disney, Sony, thinking of, and then there's kind of the mid-list one, there's New Line, and then then you kind of come into sort of and then you've got the independents like the Weinstein Company, Miramax, and then you start getting into cable television, so that's the feature film side, and then you start getting into cable television, and you're selling to Lifetime, TNT, Hallmark, Disney Channel, National Geographic, and a handful of others. I mean, it's not that are out there producing the original programming. And so, and then if you're, again, looking at network television, you're CBS, Fox, ABC, NBC. So once you look at it in that way, there really aren't that many buyers. And so that's why I sort of said very specific, like, do you have what they want and what they're looking for? And if you do, then it's absolutely worth pursuing. Yes, there are hundreds, of producers who work for those networks, and there are thousands of people if you take in agents and managers and all of the other kind of players involved, and so suddenly it starts to look very big and very unstructured, and I don't know where to start. But once you start looking at kind of is what you have a $50 million plus movie, which does need to attract 10 million people to sort of break even, or do you have something that can be done for under 20 million, or done for under 10, or done for under 5? If your book can be made into a movie for under $5 million, the world opens up to you in terms of, like, you have so many more buyers, again, a lot of those cable buyers who are interested in your property, because that's what they look for. It's big ideas that can be done for a price. And so if you're saying, well, what makes a price, do you have a lot of international locations? Are you shutting down airports and freeways and stadiums to shoot your movie? Do you have a lot of CGI, a lot of effects? period pieces can be really expensive if you have to recreate architecture and cars and costumes and technology. Whereas like if period Western can be cheap because you're just like horses and cowboys and you don't, but if you're really, like I said, if the more elaborate of a time that needs to be created, like I remember The Age of Innocence, I mean that was an expensive movie, or those other movies about sort of early New York are not cheap to produce. If you're going to need a lot of A-list talent to sell it, that's, they come at a price. And so that's kind of, if you have animals and children, those are more expensive to produce with than if you've got, adults and interiors, can be a lot more inexpensive. So that's kind of, you have to kind of look at those and that's actually when we were saying real world fiction versus fantasy animated fiction. The fantasy animated can be a lot more expensive, whereas the real world fiction can often be done for a price.
Got it. Yeah, so indoor shots, real world fiction, keep it contemporary.
Yep.
And that keeps my cost down. But I've got to have a good story and an arc, maybe arc and story arc in the character. Okay, so we've got about, I think, a little under 20 minutes to go. I want to respect everyone's time. Okay, so now let's talk about the insider track. How do I turn myself into an insider? How do I structure my pitch? What am I doing? What are what do I do here to move this thing forward?
Well, and just one thing to just embrace is there's insiders and there's outsiders. I mean, there's people who have, already done, I mean, there's a hazing process for better or for worse, and there's people who have done their time in the industry, and they have, they have credits, and they have relationships, and they have representation, and they're able to do certain things and get things done a certain way because they can. And I think it's not about looking for the exceptions to say, well, he did it that way, why can't I do it that way? And it's like, well, he did it that way because, again, there's a certain trust and credibility that he has gained. I mean, if you look, if you're Charlie Kaufman, I mean, when he did the movie adaptation, that was actually a real writing assignment to adapt The Orchid Thief for Sony. And he failed. He failed miserably. But he already had the credibility with them that he was like, I'm going to make it into a movie about how difficult it can be to adapt a book, and just this whole story about the screenwriter. And it was a very self-reflexive, and and the executives kind of got it and said, oh, that's genius, good job, Charlie. And but if someone else had kind of has I'll call it the audacity to do that, they would have been promptly fired and not, so you got to be careful and but being an outsider, there are roads in, and you just have to sort of play a little bit more by the rules. And you have to, I think the key is you just start by being a student, and you start by asking, and you start by, again, seeking advice. And sometimes you're going to have to, again, show up and pay for that advice, and that's okay because you're a student and you're just learning, and you're asking for direction, and you're making friends. I mean, one of the reasons I recommend classes is that you're able to meet your peers, and you're meeting people who are at similar stages to you, or one or a few steps ahead. And I think it's, and whether you're also meeting people that and feeds that you're following on Twitter or blogs, the resources that we've listed as coverage services also sort of come with a lot of articles, and find the people whose voices you trust and you like, and lean into building relationships with them, because there will be a moment in time when you get an offer that for representation or for to shop your work, or to option it, or to buy it. And you need to make a decision super fast about, is that a way you're going to go or not? And you want to have 5 people in your circle that you can pick up the phone and say, hey, I got this opportunity. What do you think? And obviously trust your own gut, but it's really nice to already have people who are in your circle who can help advise you at multiple junctures on your journey, because there will be a lot of questions and just information that you're going to have to field. And so again, by leaning in and learning and building a community, that can only help you.
So tell me again, what exactly does a coverage service do for me if I've got a book done, and in the case of our audience today, a fictional book done? What is a coverage? Why do I want a coverage service? What are they going to do to help me?
Well, coverage was, for a long time was just an inside industry thing that, was among studio executives and producers who were, and agents and managers who were crazy busy in between meetings and needed to sort of be able to speak knowledgeably about a project that they were in some way helping to facilitate some part of, but didn't necessarily have the time to sit down in the middle of a very, very busy workday and say, I'm going to read a script now, when they're fielding, hundreds of phone calls and running between meetings. And so they have story departments that will read the script, and be very thoughtful about what works and what doesn't work, what could work better, what are the roles, what's a synopsis, the whole, and so that, so it starts, it gives like a log line, it gives, period, genre, what are the major roles, it gives, synopsis, and then it kind of gives, some comments about what works about it, what could be better, and that was, again, always within the industry. And again, as soon as we had the internet sort of show up and the whole world of pay-to-play started to evolve, we then started to see people say, hey, what if writers could get access to this, or especially writers that are looking to break into the system to really understand how their script or story or manuscript is being read by industry professionals and how they see that it would or wouldn't fit within the entertainment and media landscape. And so to me, that's actually one of the better pay-to-play services, rather than looking for somebody to ask, like, as a favor, oh, can you read this for me and give you your opinion, but like, who are they? Whereas these guys are freelance readers. They read for studios, they read for networks, and now they're, they pick up work to read for these coverage services. And so the people who are reading your work are very savvy about what's being developed around town, what's being made, and that's another, another reason why, like, why something will or won't work may also have to do with competitive development. They might be saying, it's good, but it's too familiar to something else that is, already being made. And so that's, something that you need to get that insider perspective is incredibly valuable.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I think we're definitely getting towards the end here. Let's talk about, uh-oh. I think we got a hold problem, some hold music going there, Philippa. Oops.
Oh, hang on, just 1 second, guys. Hang on.
Uh-oh. So I think as soon as Philippa gets back, we're going to talk about the 3 reasons that buyers buy, competition, and she started to touch on this before, but we'll just let her clear that up real quick, since it's probably hard to hear.
Hello. Me. Hey, no, sorry, guys.
That's right, Philippa.
Hello. No worries.
We enjoyed the hold music. So.
Oh, I didn't realize
that's right.
I've been in production meetings all day, and so I'm actually at someone else's office, and they were like actually telling me how I could leave. I'm like, okay.
Uh-oh. So
they've locked the front door.
So 3 reasons that buyers buy. We're right here at the end. Give us a sense of competition, the element, attachment, corporate mandate. What's that mean?
So it means that, okay, actually I want to back up 1 second. So when we talk about coverage services, and again, you have to ask them for sort of quote on a manuscript and how long the manuscript is, but a typical screenplay, or like I said, I have gone ahead and submitted, some pieces of a book with a treatment, it's $129. So to me, that's not a bad investment to be like, hey, is there, where would my, work sort of fit in? And if you get recommended, which not a lot of stuff do, they can be some of your best friends in helping recommend you to the appropriate representation or producers or other people who may very well be interested in what you have. So that's why I do think those are really good resources. Okay, so now we'll jump ahead to 3 reasons buyers buy. Number 1 is everything you're dealing with is subjective. Like, I think your book is good, someone else doesn't think it's as good. That's completely my opinion of what is, and so when you're dealing with a lot of money at stake, and why are, someone who's in a corporate position having to justify it to their boss, or, or their new boss, why did we buy this project? It really helps to be able to point to things that are completely objective. And so competition is objective. It's, if we didn't pay money to take it off the table, somebody else would. And so the idea is it also sort of validates it as being good because other people were interested in it. So there is an idea of competition and creating that sort of scarcity or fear of loss that gets things to get pushed off the table. Otherwise, you'll find that people will like you to death, and they'll all say, oh, this is great, but nobody actually wants to pay you for anything because they don't have to. The second one is elements or attachments, which is there's an actor, director, producer, somebody's involved in this project that other people really want to be in business with, and so they will pay money because they're like, oh yeah, we definitely want into this project because of that. So for example, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, the element or attachment there was Rita Wilson and Tom Hanks because they were championing the project as producers, and Gold Circle, who financed the film, really wanted to be in business with them. And the third one is corporate mandate, which is basically the executives doing their job because it's exactly what their boss asked for. So, for example, say they wanted to make low-budget horror movies and they wanted to take advantage of the New Mexico tax incentives, so they say, can you bring us a horror movie set in the desert with teens? You find that project, bring it in, they buy it. So, and that's actually when we talk about cable buyers are incredibly driven by corporate mandate. And I would encourage you, if you think that you have something for a cable buyer, go to their website, see what their counter-programming is, see how they define themselves, see who they see their demographic as, and just energetically feel, like, does that feel like it was the right match from what you thought it could be? And, again, those are very, very much driven by corporate mandate. And then the other thing I was also say, again, if we talked about can you do it for under 5, movies that I've gotten involved in recently are actually all under $1 million. I've got 2, micro-budget films that we've sort of manually crowdfunded. I say manually because they're not online, but they're being funded, $5,000, $10,000, $25,000 at a time through multiple supporters of the filmmakers, and that's actually how I got involved in the project, because I basically recommended that the filmmakers finance their films that way, and they did, and they came back to me and go, okay, I got a budget, let's go. And that's that's something else we're seeing. So if your story can be done for a very small price, getting to know filmmakers, because filmmakers are looking for good stories. And obviously there's a relationship there, and you have to trust them, and you have to kind of know what they're up to and what they're about. But we're definitely seeing a lot more filmmakers being self-empowered to say, give me a budget, I don't need much, and I'll go make my movie. So there's that's kind of a whole other landscape.
Just some final technical details here. So I get someone who gets familiar with my story. Maybe they go up on Amazon, they buy my self-published book, and they call me up and they say, "Hey, I'd like to shop this around on your behalf. Can we? Is there a well-understood form for the way that relationship happens? We whip out a standard form, a standard contract, and both parties sign, or is it more informal? And what's the difference between that and then tell me about options versus purchase agreements and what I need to be thinking about."
Yeah, so we, in the past, when we represented in shopping agreements for people who, when we were managers, we technically controlled the property on behalf of our clients, so we felt secure in being able to negotiate that. But there were other people that we were shopping as producers that we didn't represent them, and we wanted to secure the rights so that when we brought it to market, we were protected in that deal. And we like shopping agreements because shopping agreements basically didn't set any terms, didn't set any prices. They were very short term, and they were entirely designed to say, we're going to introduce it to, the set buyers that we have in mind, and we're going to trust that you'll negotiate in good faith, but we're not the one signing the check. So we're just going to trust that when we find a buyer who's ready to write a check, you'll negotiate directly with them, and we'll be protected, and we'll negotiate directly with them. And that's exactly how we put together the projects that we sold to Lifetime, to Hallmark, to CBS, to ABC, and to Disney Channel. Were all based on shopping agreements, and they worked really well for us because an option agreement predefines all of the final sale terms, and so exactly what you're going to get paid is already predefined, even though they're not necessarily paying you anything or much up front, and your real sort of payment comes from their ability to execute and turn the property into, move it into production. And then purchase is just outright, you get paid up front. There may be a production bonus, meaning you get paid up front, but like if and when it finds its way to production, you may get sort of another check thereafter. The problem I have, so that the issues you're going to deal with options and sales is that you're not going to like the amount of money an option offers you, and you'll very much like the amount of money a sale offers you. But where the rub is that with an option, you get the opportunity for it to return back to you for you to find the next best home for it if it doesn't make its way to production. Whereas a sale, once they kind of have it, they own it, and they may never do anything with it. And there's no way for you to actually get it back. And so those are sort of things that need to be taken into consideration. You may be able to negotiate, and this is why having a good lawyer on your team, this is back to why I'm saying it's worth investing in finding your 5 people who you can call and say, hey, I got a question about, I've got an opportunity, do I pull the trigger and go forward, or is it something I should sort of say thanks but no thanks? And so like I said, that's why I feel like, showing up here is a great thing, and I invite you to, find your way into my circle, and, you'll find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and, other social. And I haven't really quite set up my blog yet, but I'm intending to, so I also welcome your questions, because if I can use that as a forum to answer them, that's cool. Again, you're welcome to have me consult with you. But again, I think the key is, find, and it doesn't have to be me, it can be anybody who you can sort of lean into and start building those relationships, because you will need them.
And a cautionary note for us, when if I'm new to this, and it's been a lot of hard work, and I finally get a little nibble on the hook, what do I need to look out for? When do I walk away? What do I say? Wait a minute, this isn't right for me.
Well, you want to follow your gut. Do follow your gut, and you want to find and work with people that you respect and you like. And obviously, there's a certain point, especially as an author, you're not the screenwriter. They may just sort of take it and run with it, and whatever kind of you may or may not sort of continue to have a relationship with them. But do you respect the type of work that they have done to date? Do you like their track record? Do you get a good feeling when you're talking to them? Do they do the things that they say they're going to do? Do you feel like you're being treated fairly? Do you feel like ethics are on the table? If any of that kind of stuff starts feeling weird to you, you want to question it. And again, look at people's background. IMDb gives you people's credits. It's interesting that I didn't kind of mention this before, that you sort of note that I'm an actress. I've never really had much aspiration to be an actor. Probably my earliest aspiration to be an actor was when I was a freshman in high school, and I auditioned for the senior play, and I didn't get in. And I looked at the cast list, and I was like, oh, they cast all their friends. Oh, that makes sense. And then I went up to them, and I was like, how can I help? Can I work backstage? And they're like, yeah, we'd love you to do that. And then I spent my entire high school career doing stage managing and kind of everything I could possibly do behind the scenes in the theater. And so I think a lot of it is just being, just again, are these people that you know and can do your research and find out that they've got a pretty good reputation in doing what they do.
Well, of course, I gave you the title of actress here because when I looked on IMDb, you're credited as I think it was Jeff's girlfriend in a short movie.
I am, and this is again back to again, and this is actually one of the things. Everybody sort of again back to you say it's well, you have to know someone who knows someone, but you also have to lean in and show up. So wherever you live in the country or around the world, there is a local film festival. There are movies that shoot in your town, and you just kind of have to keep showing up and become a local ambassador and become an expert and become. You are an author and be celebrated as an author, but also lean into becoming an entertainment professional and learning and hanging out with other entertainment professionals and talk to filmmakers and just like I said, show up around that. And so no, I had no other intention of being an actress except for I had friends who were shooting a short film and I was hanging out with them and they said, hey, do you want to be Jeff's girlfriend? And I said, sure. So that's where you never know kind of where. And again, like I said, when I relocated, it was not my intention to write books or to produce movies, and yet here I am because I had some filmmakers that I had met along the way and who I just kind of gave some advice to and said, hey, this is what you need to do to raise your budget, and they sort of said, okay, can we put you on payroll? I said, sure, and so there we are. And then I leaned into a little author circle and met a really fantastic, and that's actually how I met Bill, a woman who runs Author University, and she met me and she learned my background, and she said, oh, this is your book. And I actually ended up applying for a grant for the state of Colorado to write my book for authors about bringing your books to film and television, and got a grant from the state of Colorado to write it.
Well, that's fantastic. I would encourage everybody who's got a serious interest in this to connect with Philippa, and I've got her website, of course, here on the bottom of this slide, philippaburgess.com. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been fantastic. Just a ton of tremendous information, really useful stuff. I think we've hit our limit. If anyone wants to throw a last-minute question up in the question box, we can take a shot at answering it. But thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Philippa, as well.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me.
Have a great evening, everyone, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks with our next webinar. Thanks.